Dobar dan i pozdrav svim sudionicima. Dobrodošli na webinaru o upotrebi SLA printa u industriji, gdje ćemo razgovarati o proizvodima tvrtke Formlabs. Za početak ću predstaviti tim koji je danas s vama. Miloš Jovanović, predstavnik je Formlabsa i pridružit će se nam iz Beograda. Jakob Doberov također je zaposlen u Formlabsu u Berlinu. Rok Vojska je moj kolega od tvrtki IB-CADDY i je trenutno u Kamniku i ja sam Rok Žabkar iz IB-CADDY-a i nalazim se u Ljubljani. Današnji dnevni red ćemo započeti s uvodom. Razgovarat ćemo o izazovima u industriji, pogledat ćemo Formlabs produkte, materijale koje se koriste u industriji i završiti s pitanjima i odgovorima. Dopustite mi da vam na brzinu predstavim našu tvrtku IB-CADDY. IB-CADDY osnovan bio je 1991. godine u Ljubljani, gdje i danas ima sjedište. U Kamniku imamo IB-CADDY ITC, odnosno obrazovni tehnološki centar, gdje imamo i svoje 3D printere. Također imamo ured u Beogradu u Srbiji. Bavimo se širokim spektrom rješenja za industriju, imamo posla s CAD-om, to je SolidWorksom, i raznim rješenjima vezanim na SolidWorks, to uključuje CAM, PDM, razne vrste simulacija i drugo. Ako gledamo s softverske točke gledališta, imamo i vlastiti razvoj posebnih aplikacija. Također se bavimo s 3D skeniranjem i naravno 3D printom, gdje nudimo 3D printere Formlabs. Sada ću riječ predati Milošu Jovanoviću, koji će reći nekoliko riječi o tvrtki Formlabs i o tome kako je Formlabs uključen u borbi protiv koronavirusu. Evo, Miloš.
Hvala. Pozdrav s moje strane, hvala što ste došli malo da se družimo danas. Ja sam Miloš iz Formlabsa. Ukratko samo u par riječi želim predstaviti tvrtku Formlabs, što je ono što radimo, kako smo, idemo brže na što treba. Kako smo počeli i gdje smo sad, možda ne, što je i tema današnje priče. Pa ako znate o Formlabsu, super, da ne dužim. Ako ne znate, ukratko, počeli smo skromno 2012. Max Lubovski je u podrumu svoje kuće napravio prvi prototip SLA malog štampača i sa nekom namerom da to par ljudi će biti zainteresirano, ali uspjeli smo prodati nekoliko tisuća na kraju. Sa idejom, u stvari, ono što mislim da treba napomenuti, jer to je negde onaka naša vodilja uvek bila, ideja je da demokratiziramo 3D štampu kao takvu industriju skroz iz korena da promenimo, zato što stvarno smatramo da to treba biti dostupno i da svako može odštampati bilo šta. To se gleda najviše u dve stvari. Jedno je kakav je printer. Znači, želimo imati nešto što je jako lakano za korišćenje, što je s druge strane kvalitetno, i to se odgleda naravno u materijalima. Znači, želimo uvek ponuditi veliku paletu da ni u jednom trenutku nestanete i kažete aha, ovo ne mogu raditi, nego baš kontra, čak smo prošle godine napravili svoju fabriku i krenuli proizvodnju skoro 100%, su svi materijali naši proizvođeni od strane Formlabsa, baš sa tim nekom idejom da možemo ceo ekosistem ponuditi, imati sve od početka do kraja. Ukratko, Form 1 plus, pa Form 2 negde taj između period kad sam se ja pridružio o Formlabsu. Opet sve s idejom biti jako dostupno, a biti jako lagano za korišćenje i izvući maksimum iz SLA tehnologije za koju negdje smatramo da je u 3D štampi najbolja. I Form 2 se nama pokazao kao jedan od najboljih pogodaka što se tiče i demokratizacije i koliko je jednostavno uređaja otišlo kroz svet i koliko smo odštampanih delova negdje napravili u totalu. Prošle godine smo najavili i izbacili Form 3, Form 3 koji se nalazi ovdje iza Roka danas, i kasnije nešto Form 3B. Tako da proćemo tokom ove priče razgovora doći ćemo malo sve toga, ali ajde da ne dužim, čisto imamo ideju malo da spomenemo i ovu paklenu koronu iz dva razloga. Jedno, ok, to je naša realnost i to je ovde, ono što bi rekli, here to stay, neće nigde, ali s druge strane, ako smo mi neko ko kaže da želimo da omogućimo svakome da pravi sve, onda moramo da, što bi rekli, practice what you preach. Tako da i Formlabs okrenuo u nekom trenutku kad je nastao veliki problem sa pogotovo nasal swabs. Rekli smo, ok, šta možemo mi uraditi kao neko ko mislimo da imamo resurse i neko znanje. Sve naše print farm koje imamo, jednostavno smo zaustavili svu proizvodnju delova, sample parts i prebacili smo se na proizvodnju nasal swabs inicijalno. To je krenulo prvo u Americi, pa smo proširili posle po Evropi, Španija, Portugal, Nemačka, a Asia Pacific je krenula takođe, tako da je to postalo sad jedna onako globalna mašinerija. Opet kažem, 3D štampa po onome kako ja isto lično vidim će biti jedan od nosioca glavnih nove industrije, kako god želimo zvati, 4.0 ili kako god, iz jednog prostog razloga, i to su u ovoj krizi pokazalo. Ako imate potražnju koja je mnogo veća nego što je proizvodnja realno moguća, jedna od rijetkih stvari koja može stvarno pomoći je 3D print kao takav. A drugo, sama modifikacija i taj change on the go je retko moguć u bilo kojoj drugoj industriji. Ako pričamo o brizganju, nije tako lako. Kupili ste alat koji je nekoliko desetina puta skuplji nego sam printer i ne možete tako menjati dizajn, dok ovde se recimo pokazalo, mi kad smo imali nasal swab, mislim nakon 2 nedelje se promenio dizajn, reiteracija, prva, druga, testiranje i sledeće jutro je već proizvodnja krenula sa promenjenim dizajnom. Ali ukratko, nije samo nasal swab, većinom znati sami, to je od splitera, ventilatorskih razdjelnika, brisava, adaptera, BIPAP, koji su jako korisni. U UK su uspjeli praviti sa jednom tvrtkom komplete za brzu dijagnostiku, viziri, adaptari za maske za ronjenje i tako dalje. Ali da ne dužimo, pošto imamo puno stvari reći danas, kao što je Rok rekao na početku, tu smo za sva pitanja, postavljajte, pišite u chatu ili ako hoćete možemo napraviti sastanke 1 na 1 i porazgovarati o vašim aplikacijama, idejama, šta želite raditi i tako dalje. Eto, hvala s moje strane.
Ok, hvala Miloš. Sad ću ukratko spomenuti nekoliko općih izazova u industriji koji se mogu riješiti 3D printerima. Naravno, to nisu svi izazovi jer se u svakoj industriji pojavljaju različni problemi, pa i čak i u različnim tvrtkama u istoj industriji izazovi mogu biti vrlo različni. Ako što sam rekao, ovo su neki opći izazovi u industriji. Počnimo s cijenom proizvoda. Kad govorimo o jedinstvenim proizvodima, malim serijama, prototipovima, 3D print je često puno jeftinije od tradicionalnih proizvodnih metoda kao brizganje plastike, gdje je početni trošak puno skuplji. Brzina razvojnog ciklusa je izuzetno važan faktor, jer čak i odličan proizvod neće donijeti profita ako ga ne stavite na tržište. Brzi proizvod na tržištu znači brzi profit. 3D printeri mogu napraviti proizvode u par sati ili par dana. Naravno je to odvisno od veličine i tehnologije proizvodnje. Ako želite plastične proizvode izraditi na klasičan način, najvjerojatnije ponovno sa brizganjem plastike, prvo biste trebali od potpunosti dovršiti dizajn, a zatim izraditi alat za brizganje. Možda nemamo pravih strojeva u našem strojnom parku, možda nemamo strojnog parka ili je u strojnom parku zauzet. 3D printeri su vrlo prikladni u takvim slučajevima, jer su relativno mali, brzi i ne zahtijevaju stalnog operatera. Zbog tega 3D printere često kupujejo odjeli u tvrtkama koji se inače ne bave proizvodnjom. Zbog ograničenja u standardnim proizvodnim metodama nekoliko koraka može se kombinirati s 3D printom. Tradicionalne metode ograničene su u oblicima koje mogu napraviti. Međutim, ako printamo proizvode, možemo kombinirati nekoliko proizvodnih koraka u jedan korak. To opet ubrzava razvojni ciklus i čini proizvod jeftiniji, jer s njim smanjimo broj koraka u proizvodnji. Zbog mogućnosti brzog printa nije nam potrebno imati zalihe svih proizvoda ili rezervnih dijelova. Ako imamo 3D printer, možemo isprintati potrebne komade kad nam zatrebaju i s tim smanjimo potrebu za zalihama. 3D printom možemo svak proizvod prilagoditi kupcu. Ovdje govorimo o nekom reljefnom logotipu ili potpuno prilagođenem dizajnu za jedinog kupca. Primjer protetike. Konačno, ovdje također možemo govoriti o većoj sigurnosti. Ako imate 3D printer u vašoj tvrtki, nije vam trebno slati vaših 3D modela vanjskoj tvrtki za print. Na ovaj način zadržite vaše intelektualno vlasništvo kod vas. Ok, i sad ću dati riječ Roku Vojski koji će vas upoznati s Formlabs proizvodima za industriju. Ok.
Hvala.
Ok, Rok.
Ja, hvala.
Evo, izvoli.
Evo. Hvala. Pozdrav sa moje strane. Formlabs i SLA printeri so poznati po svoji vrhunskoj gladkoj površini, prepoznatljivimi detaljnimi in širokim razponu materijala. Tretja generacija Formlabs printera započela je v travnju 2019, kadar so Formlabs redizajnirali SLA 3D tehnologijo printa v LFS, to je Low Force Stereolitography. Ova redizajnirana tehnologija značajno smanjuje sile printa in tako donosi broje prednosti. Te prednosti so izuzetno gladka površina, izvrstno za prozirne materijale, ugodnje korisničko izkustvo, minimalno odrežavanje, visoke performanse printa, omogočuje Formlabsu, da razvije zahtevnije materijale in omogočuje Formlabsu izradu večjih printera. Ovdje vidimo, kako ova tehnologija radi. V sprejemniku se nalazi tekuća smola, koja se skrutne, kad je izložena UV svetlu. V LFS tehnologiji UV laser skrutne svaki sloj skozi prozorni film sprejemnika. Prvi proizvod tretje generacije printera Formlabs je Form 3. S preko 20 senzora osigurava uspešen in stalen rad. V njegov radni volumen možemo umetnuti 80% dela, koji želimo printati. Formlabs neprestano ažurira software, tako da se kvaliteta s vremenom poboljšava. Što je z ostalih 20% komada, koji ne uleže v Form 3? Tržište ovih ponuda ili outsourcing tiska, za što je potrebno vrijeme, može biti skupo in ne znamo točno, što ćemo dobiti. Pri kupnji SLA-ova visokog formata dostupni su skupaj i visoko kvalitetni printeri, kao i jeftini i niske kvalitete. Formlabs nudi proizvod po pristupačnoj cijeni uz visoki kvaliteti. Ovaj je proizvod Forum 3L s 5 puta većim volumenom od Forum 3. Postupak upotrebe i rada identičan je Forum 3. Po pristupačnoj cijeni sada možete odjednom printati velike komade ili veći broj malih komada. Prednost posjedovanja SLA printera velikog formata više nije outsourcing, radite učinkovite s 3D printerom velikog formata koji je dovoljno kompaktan za ured, ali robustan za proizvodnju. Dovoljno velik format za ispit dijelova planirane veličine poput prototip kacige. Za upotrebu printera Formlabs nije potrebna specializirani tehničar. Forum 3 i Forum 3L su jednostavni za upotrebu. Za pripremu printera potrebno je vrlo malo vremena, da biste imali više vremena za druge mežne poslove. Printer vam daje sve informacije za ispravan rad in upozorava vas na bilo kakve pogreške. Priprema modela v programu Preform gotovo je v potpunosti avtomatizirana z mnogim značajkam za brz in ugoden rad. Formlabs također nudi veliko podršku v različnimi paketami z različnimi privilegijami. Printer Formlabs so dizajnirali za povremeni in kontinuirani tisk svaki dan. Samo operaciju možete pratiti putem svog telefonskega računa. Postoje i specifični materijali za izuzetno brzi print. Ako vam trijekom printa ponestane materijala, printer će pričekati da umetne novi in staviti s printom. Međutim, ako se dogodi kvar, većina problema korisnik može rešiti zašto manj zastoja. Materijali u obliki jednolitarske vložak. Forum 3 i Forum 3L koriste iste uslužke, v kojem Forum 3L trebuje 2 i materijal avtomatski se dozira v printer, v resin tank. Možete pratiti količinu materijala i vaše zalihe, sva se beleži na vašem dashboard računu. Svaki SLA printer zahteva naknadnu obradu, odnosno pranje v alkoholu in strnjevanje v UV pečici, kako bi se postrigla odgovarajoča svojstva materijala. Rešenje za to je Forum Wash za avtomatizirano pranje vaših komada in Forum Cure za avtomatizirano sušenje pod temperaturo i UV svetlom. Približava se i novi printer Formlabs Fuse 1, zasnovan na SLS tehnologiji. Praškasta SLS tehnologija ne zahteva suporte, što donosi brojne prednosti, serijski tisk, zloženi oblici, dijelovi za montažu i pomicanje i još mnogo toga. Sada ćemo se osvrnuti na postopek printanja na Form 3L. Cijeli postupak sadrži 3 koraka. Pripremite svoj model v preformu z odgovarajočim materialom in nosačima. Priprema printer za print i dorada i čišćenje tiskanih komada. Dobro, evo sedaj. Dobro, da. Sada smo v programu Formlabs preform. Samo tukaj. Prvo odaberite odgovarajoči printer, materijal i razlučivost printa. Ovdje također vidimo koje smo materijale već umetnili u printer. Zatim orijentiramo model. Preform nam može automatsko predložiti orijentaciju. Preform također automatsko generira podpore koje se mogu ručno prilagoditi. Evo tako. Nakon tog svoj pripremljeni model postavljamo na radni platformi, možemo ga i duplicirati i na kraju samo poslati na printer. Da. Za rad printera so potrebne 3 komponente. Prva komponenta je resin tank. Ovo je potrošni materijal i materijal iz uložaka dozira se unutra. Kroz ovaj film UV laser učestvuje svoje materijale. Okay. Jednostavno postavite na vodice in gurnemo do kraja. Takole. Printer odkriva resin tank i materijal v njem. Druga komponenta je radna platforma, na koju so pričvrščeni naši delovi. Izređen je od aluminija i umestimo ga ovdje. Tako. Treća komponenta je materijal. Form 3L potrebuje 2 uložka za rad, tako da imamo dovoljeno materijala za celi print brez pauze. Sad smo instalirali vse komponente in printer je spreman. Print se može pokretati putem zaslona ili daljinske putem našega računa. Evo, dobro.
Ok. Hvala, Rok. To je bilo to?
Ne, še za vaš papir.
Ok, sorry. Onda.
Kad so delovi gotovi s tiskanjem, peremo jih v alkoholu v Formwash, tam 10 do 20 minuta, kako bismo uklonili tekoči material. Nakon što se delovi usuše, dalje se strdnjavaju u UV pečnici Form Cure, kako bi se dobila željena svojstva materijala. I to je to s moje strane, što se tiče proizvoda i postupka tiska. Dakle, hvala.
Ok, hvala, Rok. Okay. Sad ćemo prijeći na vrlo važnu temu kad govorimo o 3D štampi. razgovarat ćemo o materijalima, jer čak i tako dobar printer nije vrijedan ništa ako nema dobrega materijala iz kojih se napravu proizvodi. Temu materijala i primjera korištenja preuzet će Jakob. Ok, Jakob, if you could please tell us about the materials on the Formlabs printers.
Sure, I would be happy to. And for this, actually, we don't really need that slide because I will be going over to my other camera here. So if you could, yeah, thank you very much. So,
no problem.
Hi everyone. Just as Rock said, and thanks, Rock. My name is Jacob of the Formlabs team. I'm just on this camera real quick because I want to show you all of the materials that we have, or most of them, as I'm actually missing two because they're so new. I don't even have them yet. But I will be switching my cameras over to my little desk that I have here, because for me, I find, yes, sure, I can read all of the stats of all of these individual materials off the data sheet for you. But for me personally, I find that doesn't give you a nice enough impression. So I have all of the materials here and I will be just going through them one by one. I think Rock will do that for me, because what he will do for me is he will link the data sheet. We have a full materials library data sheet that is one PDF that has all the technical data to all of the resins in there. He will link that in the chat for you to grab, and then you can go in there. And if you're looking for, let's say, very specifically, hey, I want to know which material has which kind of heat deflection temperature or what elongation until break does this specific material have, you can look that up in those sheets. So we have a couple of resins, 5 to be exact, that we call the standard resins. They're general purpose resins. They're made to be more of a stiff type of a resin that you can use for general prototyping, to make just parts that look and feel very, very nice, that you can hand to other people to play around with. And for this, we have 4 different colors, well, 3 colors and 1 uncolored one. So there is the white resin, which just has this very nice and bright white color. So anything that you can do in here. This one, for example, is a very, very nice architectural model that also can show you some of the levels of detail that you can get with the Form 3 and the Form 3L printers. So this would be just for an architectural model. This is also one of our sample parts that we have. And then in black, I just have this nice pen here that has this little screw-on cap, which is just a nice way of showing just the overall look and feel of the material. This would also be a nice application for something that you want to make as a little present or something, where you can customize this in different patterns and different shapes and put logos on this whole thing. And this actually also does have a little logo right there. And this was also, by the way, printed on the build platform like this without any support structure. So this doesn't even need any kind of post-processing to it. And then the gray resin, which has just this very nice gray color. This is a very nice material if you want to. In this case, I have it specifically for the dental materials, for a dental application. But of course, you can use this for anything else. But the cool thing about the gray resin is that due to showing a very, very nice contrast, as opposed to something like the white resin, where this can sometimes be a bit overwhelming in the white color that it has, especially if you have a lot of lighting where you are, then the gray resin can show even minute details in the contrast very, very nicely. And that can be a very nice resin if you have something like a super fine surface structure on something like a screw-on cap or something, and you want to test out different variations of patterns on the outside that you want to show. This will be a very, very nice resin to use for this kind of thing. And then one of my favorite resins actually is the clear resin, which comes out looking like this out of the printer, basically, and then you have to wash and cure this, basically. But what you can do with the clear resin is you can very easily take something like an acrylic polishing paste, and you can give this a polish, basically. Or if you want to have this a bit more of a quick and dirty way, you can also use something like an acrylic spray on top. So this one right here, you can still see some of the layers basically right here, as this was printed. Actually, this was printed upside down like this. So you can still see some of those layer lines in here that have been filled in with the clear acrylic spray. But this was something that took me about 5 minutes or so to post-process afterwards to give this level of shine. But of course, if you want to go a little bit further, you can use something like an acrylic polishing paste. So this can be used to make all sorts of fun stuff like these lenses or any kind of screen covers or things like that. And another thing that you can use this for are also microfluidic. So this wouldn't be a microfluidic device. This is almost macrofluidic, but this can be for fluid simulation pieces. This is very nice. Then you can fill it with something like water or another liquid that maybe has a dye in it. And then you can see what happens throughout your part. This is a little mixer basically for 2 individual fluids that will mix up in these internal channels right here. So this is a very fun application that you can do with this, but you can also use this to produce light channels throughout a part. So what you can do there is take a part and basically print it, cover it with something like a silver spray that is very nice and reflective, and then just sand back off the top and bottom pieces so that light can enter from an LED that you might have below, and then it can shine out the top. So this is the clear resin of the 4 standards, which, like I said, is my favorite, but that is just me doing a lot of this fun stuff with these clear models that I really, really like, which can work quite well for this kind of stuff. The other resin that we have in the standard group would be the draft resin. Unfortunately, this is one of the 2 resins that I don't have the new iteration of yet because it just came out basically. So this is the older version of the draft resin. This is specifically made, and that's why it is named the draft resin. You can see some of the layer lines again on this piece, and especially on some of these surfaces. Let me see if I can take that into the camera a bit nicer. Here you can see some of these layer lines a bit nicer. So that would be a kind of a bad finish, we would almost say. But this resin is specifically made to print a bit rougher, but print much, much faster. So the same piece printed in something like the rigid resin, which we're going to get into in a minute, this will roughly take only 1/3 of the time of what this rigid part has. So the new variation of this resin doesn't print as fast, so we had to take out some of the printing time there. But the new version of this resin has a much nicer surface finish now, but also has a very nice and matte gray finish instead of this bright blue. So it's more akin to a little bit like in between of the standard gray resin and the Tough 2000. So it has a shade in between those two, which is a very nice and pleasing color. And it's much easier to show this to a client rather than this bright blue color. The cool thing about the draft resin, as this prints so fast, this is a very nice resin to make something like this bracket, which you might not be sure about, let's say, these screw hole placements, or you might not be sure about how long you want any of these arms or so, and you want to just print a quick test piece that you don't care if like you can see some of these layers, and then you can put this into your application, see if it fits nice, see if you measured everything correctly, and then iterate on top of it very, very fast. So if this doesn't fit and you see, hey, I should make this like 10 millimeters longer perhaps, then you can just print out another one of these in a little bit over an hour. I think this printed in like 80 minutes or something. And then you can test the next iteration and the next and the next and the next. And then at some point when you're satisfied with the result and the whole piece fits basically, then you can take the actual resin that you want to print this in and then just print it once in a very, very nice resin with the technical data according to what you need. So going from there, oh, actually, by the way, I forgot one application. This is just me from a model building. So this is one of the advantages of printing with something like the Form 3L. You have these super tiny details that you can still do. So this is a traffic light for a model train that is completely wired up on the inside with all 3 individual LEDs. So this is something that you can also achieve with something like the Form 3. So you don't have to go big like this. You can also go very, very, very small. And I'm also always keeping this in here just so nobody takes this from me, and it also doesn't vanish. Going up from there, we're going into the engineering resin kind, and there is 2 resins that we specifically start out with, as they have very specific use cases. So this one right here doesn't really look like much in the beginning, but you can see that this is made to mimic a little bit of a Bunsen burner nozzle, basically. So this is our high temp resin. And this one is very cool because this resin goes up to 238 degrees Celsius. So you can do something like this nozzle right here, or you can even do something like this bracket if you know that you need a higher temperature resistance for your material, you can very nicely print something like that out of this. Other applications that you can use this very nicely for is make a two-part mold and then print just the individual pieces. And then if you want to do something like an ABS, PP, or PE injection molding, you can directly print the mold in the high temp resin and then injection mold into that. They will take about 15 to 20 shots. It really depends on the temperature, the tolerances that you're looking for, and the pressure that you're going into there. Sometimes you can even pull out a couple times, a couple extra injections out of this, but this is something that the high temp resin is pretty good for. Another application that it is very nice for is also using it as a bracket or a holder for electronics that you still need to solder surface mount components on, because as this takes 238 degrees Celsius constantly, it also can shortly take a peak. So let's say if you're just going on there with a soldering station and you're quickly heating it up to 290 or so, it won't immediately break if you then put on surface mount components onto your electronics basically. Then the next one up is the Gray Pro resin. And this specifically has the name Gray Pro because it is the, let's put it in parentheses, better version of the gray. I'm putting better specifically in parentheses because this resin is basically different. In engineering terms, you know very well that rarely a material is just better than something else. Usually you're trading something for something else. And in this very specific case, on the Gray Pro resin, you're trading away some of the stiffness of the material, but you're getting quite a bit more in terms of elongation until break. So these standard resins are very, very stiff. They have an elongation. If I remember correctly, it's about 4.5% until break, which makes them very, very stiff. So if I print something like this quick release lever, for example, if I had it in a standard resin and I shortly have to put a lot of pressure on it, they could break. So this is something where the Gray Pro resin comes into play, as it has quite a bit higher elongation until break. It's not enough to make the resin bend under a certain load, but it still makes it much more impact resistant, makes it nicer to use for something like this lever, or if you want to print a little gearbox and want to print the gears, then something like the Gray Pro resin is very, very nice for that application. But going upwards from there, if you want it a little bit more soft and you want a little bit more in terms of simulating other materials, then we have three very specific resins for those things. So we have the Tough 2000 resin, the Tough 1500 resin, and the durable resin. So these three are very specifically made to mimic materials that you're using already in your manufacturing, in injection molding, or in anything else that you're doing. And those three materials, the Tough 2000, is basically mimicking ABS-like properties, which is very cool. Everybody who's working in injection molding for plastic knows that ABS is basically one of the go-to materials. So the Tough 2000 very much mimics that. So you can look forward to this nice impact resistance, also making something like clip-in hooks. So this is something that I made for a little project where I had the solenoid holder that had to clip into a frame basically. And there you can see that I have these very nice and stiff clip-in hooks. So this was able to just be clicked into a metal frame basically. And then this was able to be used in the application that I needed it for. So this is a very cool resin. This is also a very nice resin if you just need something that is like a general purpose resin, but is not as stiff as the other one. The Tough 2000 or the Gray Pro can be very nice fits for those, as they're pretty stiff, but they still can bend a little bit. So if they fall down, for example, they don't immediately break, even if they have smaller features in some pieces. Next one up would be the Tough 1500 resin, and this one is much more flexible, as you can see here. So something like these clip-in hooks still works pretty okay, but as this is a resin that moved back, I'm not sure if I can show this nicely, but you can see that this doesn't move back immediately. So it has a little bit of a slower pullback on this. So something like clip-in hooks does still work, but I personally wouldn't be really doing it in this. But what you can do is something like the spring that I have down here. By the way, this is a 3-piece assembled piece. This isn't printed in place. You can do that, but it gets more complicated in your support placement, and you're not doing yourself favors with doing that. So even though you can, the other question would be, should you be printing this as a 1-piece? but this is very specifically made to mimic PP-like properties, so polypropylene. So if you want to simulate that kind of stuff, then this would be an excellent resin for those kind of uses. So for living hinges and things like that, this is a very, very nice resin to contrast your Grey Pro and Tough 2000 resins with. And then if you want to go even a step further and you want it a tiny bit more soft and even much, much more impact resistant, the durable resin will be your friend, because this is basically a resin that is made to mimic PE-like, so polyethylene-like properties. So what you can look forward to in this resin is that super high impact resistance. So something like clip-in joints like this one right here is very, very nice. I think my microphone, I think, filters out the click. I'm not sure if you were able to hear that, but what this also can do, and this is also why this ball joint is just so nice and easy running, is as this mimics PE-like properties, this also can give you these super soft, low friction surfaces right out of the box. But even if you take something like, let's say, a polishing block like these nail buffers here, or if you take an acrylic polishing paste, you can even polish this up a little bit more and then make something like even like a low-cost linear rail for a prototype that can still work in something like the durable resin. You can see that I can't even take this apart without using the set screw here, but then with this, I can very nicely plop this out of there. And this can actually also take quite a few cycles before it breaks. So this will be a nice, nice addition to all three of these. So this can also be used for something like end stops for parts that you want to use, like let's say on a CNC mill. So if you want to manufacture like a block that basically mimics any kind of end stop for a piece where you just want to butt your piece up against and maybe it forms a little bit of the contour of your piece, then the durable resin can also be something really nice. This can also help you to enhance existing tools. So something like making new clamps for calipers, or what I've also seen people do with this is make a nice block that sits on the front of a nail gun. So what they did in a shop where they made custom furniture, basically, they always wanted the nails to be at a very specific distance from the outer wall. So in the durable resin, as this had this nice low friction piece, basically they printed a little guide for the nail pistol. They attached it to the front and they could just run the nail pistol along there. And then they had a nice guide there and could just click in the nails wherever they wanted them to. So that was also a very, very nice fit for this material. But then going the other way, let's say you wanted to have kind of a stiff resin, but you want it to be quite more stiff and even better at retaining basically that stiffness and holding everything. So something like this bracket right here, which is supposed to hold something in place all the time until it breaks and it's like not meant to bend at all, then the rigid materials would be your friend in that case. So this one that I have right here is the rigid 4000 material. The other one is the other super new resin that I'm unfortunately missing right now, which is the rigid 10K resin, which is even more stiff than this one. So both of these basically have a glass filled inside. So for a super high stiffness application, the rigid 10K would be nice. And then for a moderately high stiffness application, the rigid 4K material would be nice. And you're seeing kind of a running theme with the two rigid materials and all of those tough 2000, 1500, Grey Pro, durable resins. You see that what we have right here is kind of resins that are in a very similar, oops, very sorry, I bumped the camera there, that are very similar in terms of what they can give you, but they differ in like very minute details. So this can be kind of a very nice library for you to very specifically go in and know, like, this is the use case that I have. I want a resin that exactly fits this bill. And then you can see that we have slotted in quite a few materials for different use cases and material properties that you can use for those. So this material also gives you something very, very nice, and which is it is filled with a glass powder. So the haptic of this material is super nice, and it has super smooth, soft surfaces. So if you ever want to do something like a little turbine blade, basically, that also is a functioning prototype that you want to test something with, this would also be a very, very nice resin to do this with. Otherwise, this is also very nice for electronic housings with the glass powder inside. It has a little bit of a translucency. So if you have a microchip inside that has like LEDs on top, that you want to see through for like warnings or anything like that, or for diagnostics, then you can, if the wall thickness is thin enough, like let's say in the 2mm range, you can see that glow through the outside of the material without cutting a light channel into it. So that can also be something very, very useful for very specific applications. And then we have a couple more. So in that range, we also have 2 flexible materials. So we have the flexible ATA material, which is a very, very nice soft material that is made for something like specifically this. So grippier surfaces. So if you want to, let's say, print like a joystick out of the Gray Pro material, but then have like a sheath on top from a more flexible material, this can be a very, very nice application to do something like the flexible resin in. And you can see, even though it is a flexible material, you can see how thin these individual wires are. So, excuse me, even though we are printing this flexible material, you can see that it's still easy, not easy, but it is pretty manageable to print something as fine as the surface structures right here. Those of you who have been working with, let's say, FDM printers know that working with flexible materials can sometimes be a bit of a pain, but you can see that this is still something that's very manageable to do on something like the Form 3. So this would be the flexible ATA, so it has a shore hardness of ATA, and just along as with the theme of all of these other resins, now we have another material that is very close but different, which is the flexible 50A material. So it is a shore hardness 50A material, so that is even softer. So this is a tissue application for something in the medical field to simulate that kind of stuff. But this is also nice to be made for, let's say, rubber bumpers or anything. If you want to print an enclosure and protect the corners or so, or if you have any other piece that you need something like a rubber casing for, then this can also be, or the flexible material. Both of these can give you very, very nice results depending on what you need there. I have one more, and that would be the Castable Wax Resin. So for those of you who are working in the molding industry, but who want to go metal very, very quickly, unfortunately, we can't print metal on these SLA machines, but we can print the next best thing, and that is a completely off-gassable castable wax material, basically. So for this is very, very sorry, I'm missing the word here. So this is loved basically by jewelers. So they like to print their jewelry pieces just in this castable wax material. They put it on a sprue, then they put it into their into a furnace basically to burn all of this out, and then they can cast in metals very, very quickly. This is also how I made this little coin. You might have seen me wear it, but let me just take it out of my pocket here because I have another one in my pocket all the time. So this would then be something that I designed myself, this little nice coin right here. And then I made it and printed it in the castable wax material, gave it off to the caster, and now I have it as 935 silver. And this would be the completely 3D printed version of the very same coin. So these are the resins that we have right now. There's also quite a bit more in the dental industry, but I'm putting these aside for now. But if you're interested in the biocompatible applications that we also do offer, then check in with our friends from IB-CADDY, and they will be happy to help you there as well. So this is everything on the material side. So I will be switching back to my camera right here and hiding my camera there behind the green screen. So let me know if there are any more questions. Feel free to put them in the chat. And with that, I will give the word back to Rock for now.
Thank you, Jakob. Ok, sad smo pri kraju webinara i dopustite mi sad da vas još jednom pozovem da se nam pridružite na virtualnim sestancima. To će biti sestanci između vas, predstavniki Formlabsa i IB-CADDY-a. Možete se prijaviti na linku prikazanom na ovoj stranici. Kontaktirat ćemo vas, dogovoriti se za sestanak i dobit ćete vezu do sestanka, slično kao ste dobili vezu za ovaj webinar. Link za prijavu je ovaj, torej ibcaddy.com/formlabs-virtualni-sestanek. Ok. bi se vam zahvalil hvala vam na pažnji i vam želim lijep dan. Puno hvala.